Anna, I'm a designer advocate at Figma, and today I am super excited because I get to chat with Tom and Wayne, who lead engineering and design for Figma's internal design system. So up until now, Figma's produced a lot of content around how to build your design system in Figma. We've also had a lot of different customers share how they build their own design systems through various live streams and our conference config, which is why today I'm really excited that we finally get to take a look into our own design system here and learn from Tom and Wayne about the work that their team has been doing. So to kick us off, Tom and Wayne, why don't you guys give me a little bit of context on FPL, what it is, and what y'all are working on?
FPL stands for Figma Pattern Library, and in a nutshell, what we work on is really we try to maintain the internal design system at Figma. And so the idea of that being, we have a scalable foundation for Figma to build forward with, so we can just create products that are high quality and great for people to use. I think that a lot of the library name really comes from the fact that, a lot of us grew up with community libraries, and it was a place where, you would converge on and you would just go there to read picture books and just have fun, and it connects communities together.
The goal of FPL really is just to make our designers, our developers, and our customers' lives better by making us all be on the same page. So one of the first things Wayne and I did when we both started working on this was sat down and just got our language exactly the same. We got on the same page. We spent hours and hours and hours just figuring out what are the words we're going to use so that we can, when we communicate, it's going to not be lost in communication, so we can always know what we're talking, what each other's talking about, which is always really difficult between cross-functional partners.
You guys started working together pretty much from the very beginning, and I mean, even your team is made up of pretty evenly matched designers and engineers. As you mentioned, creating that shared language, what was the process of doing that?
We really want to keep things simple, so we try to track as many things in the design editor as possible. So on the design side, what we try to do is we try to fill out all of our component variants, and we try to put them side by side with how we spell out behaviors. And we really try to keep it as a source of truth, easy for design to consume and easy for engineering to reference. And I think with tools like dev mode, it allows us to, it allows any designer or engineer to really look at a component in the most microscopic of ways, so that you have one piece of real estate and it flips meanings depending on who's consuming it.
So one thing that I want to talk about more is how we broke down our communication into the things that we needed to share. But one really interesting thing that Wayne and I did right off the bat when we joined was we broke down all of our component properties into 3 categories for all of our components. Our typical variants about your primary and your secondary, but we didn't use all of the different variants as independent pieces. Instead, we had 2 other parts for our component properties. These are things that are dependent on the context. So an input label being visible or hidden is a good example of a component property that's dependent on the context. And we just called these our component properties. And the second chunk is state, which is something that changes based on user input. And so this really helps designers know, okay, here are the component properties I need to worry about during handoff. And it also helps engineers know, I can turn these directly into code because these are state variables. I don't need to worry about this at all. And they can just ignore them when they're grabbing it.
It just allowed a project like UI3 or a project like slides at config to our execution path to just be very clear, and for us to communicate what things look like, but how things behave and how these components need to stretch and grow.
So that sounds really great, but I'm sure it wasn't always possible to make the components in Figma fully aligned to the components in code. So are there any instances where that came up, and then how'd you guys navigate that?
One thing that was interesting early on was when we set up this system of different properties, like you said, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a perfect one-to-one match with engineering and design. And so we don't want to make components in the Figma files optimized for engineering. Is what created a lot of the inspiration for what is today Code Connect. We had a bit of a false assumption that we were going to actually be able to make these 2 things align really well. And what we found over time was that sometimes what is easy to consume for engineering does not always make it easy to consume for design. And so in those cases, we use Code Connect's extensibility to really help us create the right code that comes out of the design components. And then Wayne is free to make things that are really nice to use in design, even though it doesn't match one-to-one with engineering. We don't have to have a deterministic process to go from a design component to an engineering component, because that can all be encoded in Code Connect.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you mentioned before about how certain states can be ignored by engineering because it's already built into the component. I'm sure there's lots of other differences in terms of like what's already readily available versus what kinds of properties engineers need that designers might not know exist. FPL played a really huge role in Figma being able to launch UI3 and slides in beta for Config 2024. So considering the really short timeline of building FPL, how'd you guys juggle that?
So yeah, a really big part of that was honestly just establishing variables. We had a whole set of color variables, color tokens that we had turned into variables. We had things like spacer variables and corner radius variables. And really at a very basic level, that helped us lay a foundation for a lot of the choices that we'd come to make downstream, especially in a project in UI3 where it touches so many different surfaces. And there's a lot of really control dense pieces of real estate, like properties panel within the design editor. It's important to have those like very simple basic pieces to call on. And oftentimes it's like the simplest units that are the most clearest that'll be the most effective in the long run.
The UI2 design system was built before Figma variables existed. And so we were managing our variables, like many people, in a spreadsheet that then got turned into code somehow. And so one of the first things that we did in this transitionary period was we took all the UI2 variables and our tokens, and we made a source of truth, made Figma the source of truth in them rather than this spreadsheet. We put everything into Figma variables, and then we built a tool that what it does is it uses Figma's REST API, sucks all of the takes all of the tokens down and turns into a format that we can then use to generate code for web, for iOS, for Android, turn it into our token system. Then we could do the same for UI3 variables. Now we had a way to manipulate them in the code base and make sure that things were responding to them in both places.
Since UI2, not only has the team really grown, as you guys mentioned, but also the number of products that Figma supports has increased as well. How are you guys thinking about how FPL can help support Figma as it continues to grow and expand?
On top of the UI2 and UI3 modes to our design system, we also have different modes for each product, where FigJam has a completely different brand color, which then has to have a bunch of different accents. And so all of that is encoded into variables and then downloaded into our theme. What's really fun about modes is that not only does slides and FigJam and design all have different brand colors and other modes to their tokens, we also need to sometimes embed pieces of FigJam into design. Also, sometimes we need to put pieces of dark mode FigJam into design. And so we made all of our tokens work specifically using CSS variables so that we can override them in particular sections. Our components are responsive to the environment that they're in. So as long as we set, hey, your mode is set here, then inside of our application, we can embed components in it whatever way. People don't need to know that they're embedding a FigJam button versus a Figma button. It's all just responsive to the design tokens.
Yeah, and the beauty of that approach in design is really, a designer can take any brand color of their specific choice and adapt it to their context, whether that's in light mode or dark mode. And it makes, designing a product really easy because they can focus on solving the problem that they need. But also color variables being mode specific can toggle between dev mode, slides, and editor. And if there's ever any sort of future use cases that we need to cover, we can automatically extend the modes in our variables to cover those cases. And I think the modularity of it and the extensibility of it is really, it helps a lot because we can very quickly sort of publish a lot of these changes throughout the team. And folks can just, go off to the races with the colors that they need. And they can tweak them as needed through branching and merging. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And like kind of building off of what you're mentioning, branching and merging. I mean, you guys said that FPL, it's inspired by how people think about public libraries, really wanting to build a community around Figma's internal design system. So how are you thinking about how FPL is going to evolve based on team's feedback as more designers and engineers are using it?
So one of the things that we built at the heart of FPL was that FPL is a pattern library. It's not a component library. And so we've actually separated out different parts of a component that are built independently. So one of the foundations that we built on top of was this concept of a primitive, which is this separate from the typical visual design in that it is the behavior of a component. And so we have, for example, a button primitive that is for all buttons in the product, they should be backed by this one button primitive that handles everything you need to do about a button. Well, you'd think, oh, what is there that goes into a button? But when you're building cool power user tools like Figma, you have these really intricate patterns that you need to make sure feel really good everywhere and can still be accessible. And so one pattern that you'll see is in the editor, you know that when you are clicking on something, a lot of our actions happen on your mouse down because it's just a nicer feel for the customer. That would normally break accessibility. And so we put a bunch of work in to make sure that this pattern not only does still feel good for our customers that are using a mouse, but also customers that are using anything can use this all the same. And so we've built that into the heart of our buttons so that all of our buttons use this down the line. And so as the design system grows, we can add new styling of button without losing that same feel to it. And so the same is going to be true for many other patterns as we move through our work. And so design can be built. When design wants to add new components to the library, it's smaller and smaller chunks of incremental work to do that on the code side.
Yeah, and I think building on Tom's point, it's really important for us to build timeless patterns. Things may change tomorrow, but I think just giving us a solid foundation, a functional and behavioral foundation to build on is really key for just giving some staying power to the work that we're doing. We have a pretty great culture on the team of just having a service mindset and being embedded within teams to help them cover any new use cases or things that might come up. So at least on the design side, we have Slack forums, and we just constantly, because our UI3 library is shared across both design and engineering, people can see a living and breathing sort of document and be able to ask questions in real time. Also, we have a series of crits where, a lot of folks on the FPL team, a lot of designers on the FPL team will be able to plug in and see things from beginning to end. And really the goal of that is to be service-minded and how we just help designers move the kit along.
All right, I have to ask this question because it's something that everyone keeps asking, but what's it like building Figma's design system in Figma?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's really important for us to dog food our own products so we can make them great for the customer. And I think a company of our size and a design team of our size and scale and how we're growing really quickly really helps us to battle test a lot of those tools in the field. And I think us being able to manage such a complex system on top really speaks to the durability of our tools and but also it helps us expose what's not working very quickly. And so we really try to improve the product as we go.
One really good example of this on how using your own product can make something better, make your product better. Early on, the concept of Code Connect was kind of it was a quick idea. We're like, oh, we can just quickly generate some code snippets for our stuff and see what happens. And so the DevTools team had that rigged up really quickly. And so, but we started using it right away on FPL. And so as we started to use this, we started to run into cases where not every property maps directly to a code property. They come into different categories, and maybe ergonomics for designers are different than ergonomics for developers. And so the flexibility of Code Connect grew and grew and grew until Code Connect was the awesome product that we have today, instead of just being a simple, okay, let's convert Figma properties to code properties. And it allows for pretty much any scale of design system to convert their design code or their design source of truth directly into their engineering source of truth. And that just comes from using our own product.
Yeah, I feel like normally when something sounds straightforward, it almost never actually turns out to be that way. So, but it's great that you guys eventually got there through testing and feedback. I'm curious to know, as you worked on FPL for the past year and a half, how has your opinion around design systems changed, building them, maintaining them? I'm curious to know if this has changed your perspective in any way.
I can't speak for Tom, but I feel like I'm learning something new every day. Don't mean to sound cliche about that answer, but I think our team is just growing so quickly, and every day we're finding a new ceiling that our design system is hitting. Whether that's where do we draw the lines between behavior inside editor or inside file browser? Where are the needs for any particular surfaces? There's a lot of room for sort of improvement, and I think it's every sort of day is a new lesson in how we can take it to a different place.
So I've been working in design systems for a while now, before Figma even. But the very interesting thing about Figma's design system is how we have 3 products that really have their own feeling to them. They have to be consistent, and we want them to behave consistently, but they need to feel different. And so learning how to juggle a design system between 3 products, and the file browser needs to have elements of all of them. This is such an interesting challenge that like my team is working on, that we're all working on every day. And it's a new adventure.
Now that, FPL is kind of in the hands of people at Figma, what are the next steps?
The next steps are, let's figure out what needs to be improved. There's a design system's never done. Anyone who is working on design systems says, my design system's done, I don't need to do anything more, has stopped building product. And so, everything new that we do requires us to go back and revisit a pattern and say, okay, if I'm stretching this pattern, if this pattern doesn't feel right here, do we need to make that pattern better?
I think Figma as a product suite is sort of changing in ways that is always trying to ultimately service the customer. And yeah, and with that, we have to service those changes and adapt. And I think, the ambition of our team, the FPL team, is really to be at the forefront of that and operationalize that and make that as easy to use and as easy to implement as possible for both us and the end customer.
All right, so the last couple of minutes here, I wanted to share a couple of questions that people posted on our socials that they would love to know about FPL. First question, what's the hardest thing to keep organized in a design system?
I think feedback is really hard to keep organized. Figma's gotten to be a big product, right? Most products in the world depend on us now, and so we have a bunch of people trying to build them. As the design system grows, we have to get more and more feedback, and that is an interesting challenge. And so we've had a lot of my focus in the last 6 months has been figuring out the right points in time and the right ways to collect that feedback and make sure we don't lose it.
All right, other question, how do you manage documentation and usage guidelines?
So we actually just built a whole new doc site for the engineering part of the design system, where we build it from the ground up to service all the things our customers are asking for. Our customers being developers in the organization. And so we built it not only to document the components, but also to document how some best practices to using them, as well as some pitfalls to avoid, especially around accessibility, to help train people up on how to build more accessibly for the web. And we built that all in cooperation with Wayne and some of his design colleagues to make it look cool. When you're going to design system doc site, you should feel good about it. And so we spent a little bit of extra time making that look and feel good to the people that are using it too.
One other question that someone asked was, which component did you all create first? Don't tell me it's the button.
We created the checkbox first. That was the first thing we did, because buttons are too wide reaching. And the first thing we wanted to do was something that was both simple, but also wasn't everywhere. And so checkboxes are used, they're important, but buttons are kind of complicated, like we talked about. But buttons get crazy because they're everywhere, whereas a checkbox is only used in a few places.
So checkboxes were an opportunity for us to just score quick wins early. As a team that was still gelling and coming together, we could celebrate something that was pretty achievable.
Do people get punished if they detach?
Yeah, they go to FPL jail.
Yeah, I'm the one who slides notes under them and tells them how to get out. But I think I think for myself, I try to make sure that, in the event that they need to detach, it probably means that we're not doing something right. And so myself as a designer, I try to just, spend some time, be very embedded within the teams and just figure out why. If it's a case of us not covering a particular state or variant, we can solve that. And sometimes it's a deeper functional thing, in which case it might give rise to new guidance and new behaviors, and for us to actually definitively draw a line and say, hey, this should be different for a very specific reason. All of that information is really helpful. And I think a detach is just a symptom that, maybe there's something that we're not doing. And so for myself, I just take it as a signal that, hey, how can we do things differently? How can we help you? And to investigate those reasons.
One thing that we did early on was make it so that detachments were able to be visible in code. And so what we can do is now we can go and audit why teams are detaching, ask them follow-up questions if it's not obvious what they're detaching into. And so now we are able to track all these detachments and use them as a feedback channel for us to develop the design system further.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys so much for sitting down with me and talking about FPL. It sounds like you have a lot of work cut out for you, but wishing you all the best of luck.
Thank you. Yeah. It's great doing this. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tom and Wayne, for sharing some of the insights of things that you've learned when building FPL, as well as some of the details around how you built your design system. To the people who are watching, I hope you guys really enjoyed this conversation. If you have any more questions around how to build a design system or how we build it here at Figma, please drop a comment below, and we hope to see you guys some other time.